The humid air over doesn't just carry the scent of spent fuel and burnt rubber, it carries the weight of a revolution. In the final minutes of the practice session for the Brazilian Grand, the digital timing screens across the GP paddock flickered, then froze. A name that didn't belong at the top of a prototype was suddenly glowing in purple. To the casual observer, it was just a fast lap. But to the engineers inside the KTM garages, it was a biological impossibility. A rider with zero full-time experience in the premier class was manhandling a M1, a bike many claimed was a dying breed, and forcing it to dance to a rhythm it wasn't designed for. The footage was terrifying. While the rest of the grid leaned into the corners with calculated aerodynamic precision, the Turkish rider was doing the unthinkable. He was arriving at the apex sideways, smoke pouring from a rear tire that seemed to be screaming in protest. The paddock went silent. The guy wasn't just participating, he was dismantling the established hierarchy of world motorcycle racing. No one inside the inner circle expected what would unfold next, and it would change everything for him, his team, and the entire 2026 season. But to understand the shockwaves was sending through Brazil, you have to understand the man behind the visor. Born into a world of stunts and gravity-defying maneuvers under the tutelage of the legendary, was never trained to be a smooth rider. He was built to be a predator. In the World Championship, he became the king, a rider who could balance a 1,000 machine on its front wheel while traveling at speeds that would make a fighter pilot blink. Yet when his name was first linked to the GP project, the skeptics were loud. The transition from a production-based to a multi-million-dollar GP prototype is often described as moving from a street car to a Formula One machine. The electronics are more invasive, the tires are stiffer, and the carbon brakes require a level of feel that many believe's aggressive style would simply shatter. Critics whispered that he was too wild for the M1's delicate Japanese philosophy. But behind that calm, smiling expression in the hospitality suite, pressure was building fast. Wasn't just fighting for a trophy, he was fighting a decades-old stigma that riders lack the finesse for GP. He knew that in Brazil he wasn't just representing himself, he was carrying the pride of an entire production-based racing world. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras, in a closed-door meeting where the data revealed a staggering truth about his braking markers. Inside the garage, a quiet war was being waged. For years, the Japanese manufacturer had clung to its four-engine configuration while the rest of the world embraced the brutal power of the V4. But in 2026, the whispers turned into a roar. Was working on a secret V4 project, and the bike was swinging his leg over at the satellite team was no ordinary machine. It was a bridge between two eras. Technical analysts noticed something strange in the sector data during the opening sessions. The bike appeared to have found a sudden, violent surge in corner exit acceleration, the Achilles heel that had plagued for a generation. Some insiders claimed that the electronics package on Spike had been unlocked, allowing his precise slide control to act as a human traction control system. He was using the bike's newfound power to rocket out of turns, but it was his entry speed that left the engineers breathless. According to team telemetry, was braking 15 meters later than any other rider in history. He wasn't just testing a motorcycle, he was stress testing the very limits of engineering. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. The Brazilian circuit is a temple of speed, a brutal combination of high-speed sweeps and technical stop-and-go sections that punish the weak. For most, it's a track that demands respect, for it was a playground. The hard braking zones before the Senna S were exactly where his DNA became a lethal weapon. While the factory riders were struggling with the transition from high-speed aeroloading to mechanical grip seemed to thrive in the chaos. He was using the aero winglets not just for downforce, but as leverage to pivot the bike in ways the designers hadn't even simulated. It was a technical wrapped in a street fight. But as the practice sessions wore on, a rift began to form. Some mechanics claimed something felt off with the tire longevity. Style was explosive, yes, but it was also incredibly taxing on the Michelin rubber. Speculation emerged in the paddock that if the race went the full distance, his extreme technique would leave him riding on bare rims before the final lap. Yet, as the sun set over the circuit, the rumors suggested deeper tension behind closed doors. The success of a guest or satellite rider is a double-edged sword. While the crew was ecstatic, the atmosphere in the official factory garage was reportedly becoming frostier by the hour. How could a rider with so little time on the M1 outperform the veterans who had spent years developing it? Reports suggested a heated argument regarding data sharing. The factory side wanted braking maps. Side argued that his braking wasn't a map, it was a feeling that couldn't be downloaded. The political tension was palpable. There were whispers that management was already drafting a secret 2027 contract, one that would see bypass the traditional ladder and take the lead seat in the factory team. This wasn't just about one race in Brazil anymore. This was a power struggle for the soul of. Every time went faster, the weight of expectation on the factory riders grew heavier. The mental pressure was reaching a breaking point, and some believed the internal friction would lead to a catastrophic mistake on track. But what the paddock discovered next shocked everyone. During the final race simulation, didn't just maintain his pace, he accelerated. In a staggering display of mental fortitude, he began clicking off lap times that were within a tenth of the circuit record. He was defying the tire drop that every other rider was complaining about. His crew chief was seen staring at the monitor in disbelief. It appeared that had found a hidden way to use the bike's electronics to save the tire during the mid-corner phase, only to unleash the full V4 assisted power on the straights. He was playing a different game. He wasn't just fighting his rivals, he was fighting the expectations that had been placed on his shoulders since his very first race in Turkey. Then at the very end of the session, a dangerous moment occurred. Entering the final turn at over 300 kilometers per hour, the rear of the M1 stepped out violently. The crowd gasped. It was the kind of high-speed incident that usually ends in a trip to the medical center, but instead of a heavy setback, performed a save that the laws of physics, staying upright through pure, unadulterated talent. Yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm. Outside the track, the digital world was exploding. The MotoGP narrative had become a global sensation. Fans from Istanbul to Jakarta were flooding social media, creating an atmosphere of intense confrontation between the traditional GP and the new wave of supporters. The pressure was no longer just technical, it was cultural, was being hailed as the Sultan who would conquer the West. For a rider who often talks about just having fun, the weight of an entire nation's hope was a heavy burden to carry. Every move he made was scrutinized by millions. In the press conference, the top riders, the world champions, were asked about the threat. Their answers were diplomatic, but their eyes told a different story. They didn't see a guest rider anymore. They saw a predator in their territory. The psychological warfare had begun, and the no-pressure environment had enjoyed was rapidly evaporating. As the grid for the Brazilian Grand prepared to form, the air was thick with the realization that the sport was on the verge of a new era. Had walked into the most exclusive club in the world and demanded a seat at the head of the table. Whether he stands on the podium or faces a difficult recovery from the sheer physical demand of the race, one thing is certain: the myth of the barrier has been shattered, has found its spark, and the GP paddock has found its new nightmare. Brazil was never just a race for, it was a declaration of war. And as the red lights prepare to go out, the world is left wondering if he can do this in his first weekend. What happens when he actually starts trying? What happened after that practice session left even his closest team members stunned, and the story of the 2026 season is only just beginning.